keeping lambs moving, and then segregating the ewes that maybe need priority feeding, they can be put in maybe with your ewe lamb group or whatever as well, so they're getting good access. Talk about the kind of leader follower, ewes following lambs, but there will be ewes within those groups as well that will need more than that, so they should be given preferential feeding, and they can be put in with a lamb group or wherever where they're getting access to the best quality grass to try and rebuild some of that condition.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined in this week's episode by Philip Creighton to give us a monthly update on grassland management tips. In the episode, Philip will cover current grass growth rates and average farm covers, how to go about assessing demand and the need to start building covers, fertiliser recommendations and timing of that application, as well as tips on managing autumn reseeds. We hear now from Philip.
There's a huge range in growth rates at the moment, Kieran, for obvious reasons. Over west here, the growth rates in Athenry have been, quite high, really all the way through the summer. We've been getting a mix of heat and a good bit of rain as well. Growth rates this week are still over 80 kilos, but I suppose that's up here, we'll say west northwest, which is having a very good year for grass growth. If we move down into the southeast, we've growth rates, looking at some of the better farm growth rates coming in there for this week and last week. Growth rates down even into as low as 15 kilos down the southeast this week. So, and that's driven largely by, a big range in soil moisture deficits. I suppose rainfall levels and soil moisture deficits, soil moisture deficits is up in the more northern half of the country and northwest, really only maybe 5 or 10 mil. But as you go down into the south and southeast, it could be up on 60, 65 mil at this stage. So that's really restricting growth on those farms, and that's obviously having a big impact on the grass available. On average, I suppose, looking at the grass 10 update there this week, on average on dry stock farms, the days ahead was 23. But again, if we talk about the range and growth rates and growth potential that we've outlined there, the average is really hiding that, there could be days ahead figures up there of 35 on some of the areas where there's, above normal growth. And days ahead figures dropping below maybe where we'd want them to be on the farms which are experiencing drought. So every farm is going to be different in the circumstance we find ourselves in at the moment.
Huge variation, and probably in the southeast it kicked in a wee bit quicker this time, probably didn't get back to where it needed to be from the previous dry spell. When you mentioned about days ahead figures, Philip, we're mid-August now. What do we need to have in terms of supply at the moment and as we kind of look forward into September?
Yeah, so I suppose standard targets for August we're really talking maybe 15 to 20 days ahead, rising to 25 to 30 days by the time we get to September. So, mid to late August now that we're heading for, we're talking about that 20 days really, building for 25 in early September and heading for 30 by the end of September. And in areas where there's good growth or growth is meeting demand, that's going to be achievable and people will be on target. But looking at that, your typical demand on farms this time of year, look, depending on how lamb drafting is going, at that you're going to be somewhere between 30 to 40 kilos for a lot of farms. If you're not growing that, and we talked about the areas where they're well below that now, even if their days ahead figure is in or around that 15 to 20 at the moment, that's going to continue to drop quite rapidly now because your growth rates are going to be lower than normal. So that needs to be taken into account, and I suppose a plan put in place in terms of how they're going to deal with that. The outlook for next week is quite dry as well, so that's not going to improve in the short term.
Look, when we are talking about that demand, it kind of brings us back to the grazing groups, how far on those lambs are on farm. It is an important thing to do at the moment, Philip, just to assess the overall demand and maybe take a tighter look at the grazing groups. What would your advice be there in terms of that?
Yeah, so look, for farms that are tight on grass or are getting tight for grass, as we'd always say, anything that can be done to reduce demand. So in that case, it hasn't been a bad year in terms of lamb performance, in terms of they had a good spring, got a good start, and growth rates, again, reports coming from around the country and what we're seeing on the better farms, growth rates are up or much better than last year and the year before when we had quite poor weather. But having said that, there can be a range in that too, and I suppose the first thing we need to look at is can we keep lambs moving off the farm? That's going to drop demand continuously. So if it's a case that we're getting tight for grass. Keep lambs moving as they become fit. Lambs that aren't quite fit, establishing your finishing groups, and maybe targeting, if you're going to have to be putting in supplement to try and reduce demand, target those more forward lambs to get them gone quicker. And if you have to increase the amount of supplement to get them gone. Going through yours, again, look at if there's culls still on the farm that are fit to go, or even if there's culls there and you're tight for feed, maybe selling culls that maybe need further feeding, but they can be offloaded as well. Prices are quite good at the moment. But I suppose not forgetting now that we're in mid-August, if we leave aside cull that are going to be leaving the farm anyway, it's very important to assess the condition of the ewes which are going to be retained for breeding. And what we definitely don't want to do is to let them suffer in terms of reducing body condition from now on in the run up to mating. So again, if we're looking at a situation where we're going to be restricted on feed supply, prioritizing the ewes from now on, and even if we had to sell some store lambs, even just to reduce demand a bit more to prioritize feed to the ewes. Again, there's a good store lamb price there at the moment, and that could be taken advantage of.
Philip, you mentioned there about prioritising. It's probably no harm just to mention where the grazing target should be.
Yeah, so I suppose look at as I said, what grass is, and look, and I know there's a lot of parts of the country and a lot of the bigger sheep producing areas, along the west coast and northwest. As we said, there is plenty of grass in them. So this is maybe more general terms, but it's keeping lambs moving and then segregating the ewes that maybe need priority feeding. They can be put in maybe with your ewe lamb group or whatever as well, so they're getting good access. We talk about the kind of leader follower, ewes following lambs, but there will be ewes within those groups as well that will need more than that. So they should be given preferential feeding, and they can be put in with a lamb group or wherever where they're getting access to the best quality grass, to try and rebuild some of that condition. And look at after that, then it's assessing what the circumstances are on the farm, and if there's a need to reduce demand. As I've outlined there, it's reducing. It's maybe getting rid of culls or considering open supplementation to lambs in general, or creating that finishing group where you'll probably get a better return from putting in that supplement. Or in extreme circumstances, if things are getting very tight, look at the store lamb option.
Just in terms of the residuals at the moment, Philip, like we're talking about the ewes, how tight should we be pushing?
Yeah, so look at it in terms of residuals. It is important that we are still grazing out towards, to have clean regrowth, especially now as we come into the autumn. So we don't want to be coming out at high residuals. That's going to lead to issues with cleaning out fields as we move through the autumn. So, we are in mid-August, but we really need to be keeping an eye now on starting to think about the closing plan in October. So you're probably 2 grazings away from starting to close in a lot of places. So the ewes, provided that the ewes are in adequate condition, those ewes can still be grazing down to, we'll say, your 4.5 centimeters or whatever to leave clean regrowth going into the next couple of rotations. But don't force, ewes that need that little bit of preferential treatment. And that's why you'll be removing those ewes from the main group and putting them in with one of your lamb groups that maybe are coming out at 6 centimeters or whatever, that they're not being put under pressure.
Probably one other thing we need to talk about there, we're on with building covers. From mid-August on, fertilizer application, Philip, I suppose this is very dependent on getting rainfall and having adequate growing conditions, but what should we be looking at target-wise in terms of amount, and when should we be applying it?
The advice would be that obviously if you're in a soil moisture deficit, you will have to wait for rainfall to come and for the soil moisture deficit to reduce before you apply fertilizer, because it's moisture that's restricting growth at the moment now, not nitrogen level. Once the moisture comes, then the nitrogen will, boost what growth does come at that stage and can be applied. But that's the first thing to say. For areas that are growing grass still and do have adequate moisture, yes, we need to start thinking about the final round of fertilizer. We'd be saying that, to get that out probably by the end of August, early September, the earlier before, you don't wait, I suppose, until the close period, the deadline for the close period, because the earlier that's applied, the better response we're going to get. So, in that circumstance, I suppose, look, it's going to depend on feed demand. So higher stocked farms, really, you're talking about probably something around 25 kilos to the hectare, 20 units to the acre. And then on lower stocked farms, you're down at maybe 15 to 20 kilos. So you're 10 to 15 units to the acre. Just to boost on, what will be growing over the following 6 weeks, I suppose, in terms of building covers for the autumn, and giving a bit of life there for when you do start the closing plan, that there's nutrient there to grow some grass to start that cover building for next spring.
Philip, probably just we mentioned that no harm too to consider, particularly on fields maybe have had offcuts of that on it, if there is a need for care, that and consulting your nutrient management plan.
Yeah, again, absolutely, Kieran. So it will be important that if there's soil test and nutrient management plan done there, to consult that, maybe what your allowances are, what can be applied, and definitely yes, if there's areas of the farm where you've cut silage or taken out surplus grass or whatever over the year, and you haven't replenished with K, obviously removing silage, even lighter cuts, can remove quite a lot of K. It's a good time as we move into the autumn now to get that K out again, that it's working its way into the soil and will be there to boost growth next spring. And I suppose as we move into the autumn winter, then for those that maybe haven't got an updated soil test or nutrient management plan done, to be planning ahead to get soil samples taken over the winter, that you get an updated plan done that you can use then to make better decisions, and will help in terms of your allowances if you have actual results back for next year.
Finally, Philip, it's probably been a bumper year for reseeding on farms, and we've certainly seen a lot of autumn reseeds going in. What are your couple of just quick tips on how to get the most out of them in this back end?
You're right, Kieran. In a lot of places, there's been good opportunities, albeit if we leave away the southeast area, that have been under pressure. In a lot of parts of the country, there was good opportunities to get reseeding done. The big thing with the reseeding is the management after it, I suppose, at this stage, and that basically what we mean by that is weed control is one. So trying to get a post-emergent spray on in good growing conditions to get as good of a kill or control on the weeds as possible at a very young stage, so the root network won't be overly developed. You should get a good kill and provide good weed control into the longer term. And then the grazing management of it, in terms of keeping those swards grazed and getting at least 2 grazings off it now between now and when they be closed up for the winter, to try and get the sward to tiller out and establish well that it'll be a good quality sward for next year.
Could have a big impact on your spring covers on opening on that farm.
Exactly.
Philip, thanks very much for coming on us. We'll be chatting again in the near future.
Thanks, Kieran.
We leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Philip again for coming on us. Some practical tips to help us keep on track for the coming weeks. That's it for me. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.